James Alfred Meyer was born in 1856 in a log cabin in the Catskill Mountains of New York. His father was Levi Hervey Meyer, and his mother was Eliza Bridges. Shortly after Alfred's birth, his father built a large home on nearby Prospect Hill that would accommodate his growing family for the next 40 years. Milford is a tiny village nestled in the rolling, tree-covered hills of the northeastern corner of Pennsylvania. It's here in this town, in 1885, James Alfred Meyer purchased a small piece of land and set up a tent to start his photography business. He started out making both tintypes and glass plate negatives. One day, a beautiful young woman named Emma Van Etten came into the gallery to ask Alfred to photograph a cat. It was the beginning of a relationship that led to their marriage in 1890, and subsequently that union produced a family of 5 sons and 1 daughter. In 1895, James Alfred Meyer filled in the space for his occupation, artist. This self-description reflects his awareness that his profession demanded far more than the craft of simply recording images. Photography was an art, and he was an artist.
For him to be calling himself an artist in 1895 without a previous experience, but to consider himself as an artist with and through the medium of photography. That's important because at the time, being a photographer was not necessarily connected with being an artist.
I see some of the same spirit and images that were characteristic of the Impressionists, as well as the American painters that were his contemporaries, Edward Hopper and Grant Wood. Photographing and painting was all recording of these images that were very much a part of their time. But certainly the spirit of the times that we see in James Alfred's photographs is the same that we see in the Impressionist artists and the painters who painted in America at the early part of the 20th century. James Alfred did it with the camera. He had the same spirit, the same vision, the same awareness that the artists, the painters had at their time. A lot was happening in the world. Small-town America was very involved in World War I. There was a campaign to encourage volunteers to fight in the war. Uncle Sam pointing at him and saying, "I want you to enlist to become a member of the Army." James Alfred's son, Percy, was in the Army Reserve. Fred also went into the Army and was sent overseas in a machine gunner group. It's a very real part of life on James Alfred and his family, and as it did with all of the people in the United States at that time. At this gallery, shadows are cast, and warranted sure to last, with speaking eyes and native grace, secured within a moment's space. When light strikes an emulsion, it turns that emulsion dark. It turns the emulsion into a shadow.
What happens is the plate is coated with a light-sensitive substance so that when light strikes it, it makes a chemical change, and the chemical change is actually depositing silver metal, which is dark. And so where you have a photon of light hitting the plate, you have a particle of silver. And the more light, the more silver, and so it's darker. So you have a black car with white sidewalls, and so it's reversed, and that's why it's called a negative.
A glass plate photographer records light as shadows, and he preserved those shadows. I have always been a great believer in today. Most people live either in the past or in the future, so that they really never live at all. Utopia is in the moment, not in some future time, some other place, but in the here and now, or else it is nowhere. He recognized that he was recording a moment, a shadow, a fleeting particle of time that was a reflection of that particular image that he saw as worthy of being recorded.
Photographers are in the world. They respond to what they see. They respond to the clouds or to that plum on the table. It's never just one thing. These guys are usually very acute visually, and they see the world in new ways, and they understand what things are going to look like as a photograph. And I think you see that in a lot of Meyer's work.
Richard Avedon said, "There is nothing in the world more fascinating than a human face." Preserve the shadow before the substance fades, ere death's destructive fingers hath caught the lines where beauty lingers.
We typically focus on people who had to go someplace else. They had to be the outsider and go into a community that they're not a part of, and photographing it from an outsider point of view, like what stands out. Meyer's the total insider. He's a member of the community. He knows the people he's photographing. They've come to him year after year, generation after generation. We tend to focus on, those who are coming from the outside. But that element of being an insider shows up in those photographs. And he knows what people wanted. He knows how they wanted to be seen, how they wanted to be projected. And, like the plane, for example, that tells you a lot of who they wanted to be. And Meyer would know that because he's one of them. Whereas if you take someone from the outside, they may not have that same opportunity.
My dad was a man of few words. I don't remember ever having a conversation with him. He didn't do much talking. When Edson went to college, he said to his father, "Is there anything you want to say to me before I go away to college?" His father said, "Never tell a lie." Well, when I went away to school, Pa never told me even that much.
These individuals, these studio photographers who are rooted to a particular community, give us a window into what life was like, what they're doing, what they wore, how they did their hair. Those things would be lost for us if we didn't have somebody doing that for us. It's hard not to say, look, I want to be there. We are so inundated with photographs today, and everything has a camera to it. We're producing millions and billions of photographs. The camera and photography has been democratized, but everyone can make it. But in a way, it's nice to have that one person you trust to be the eye of your community. Trust to make those images that say, okay, this is who we are. And the portrait that Meyer made of his community seems to be as ideal as it can get, in a beautiful setting with waterfalls and all this. It's hard to not want to project yourself back into that world.
And there were at least a dozen waterfalls within a few miles of Milford. So he made photographs of the waterfalls and the woods and the scenery, which he made into postcards. A lot of tourists came up from New York City for the summer, and they purchased his penny postcards to send to their friends. Manet said the most important person in a painting is light.
Mother would get up from the table and take away my father's plate so he could lay the Bible on the table. And she would go to the shelf and get the Bible. Now, I never made an effort to memorize Scripture, but I'm telling you, it's there. Even up in our old age, we all love each other. Oh, yeah.
It's that intimacy that makes looking at a studio photographer of a community like Milford a fantastic opportunity to provide a very good window into how these people lived and how they wanted to project themselves into the future.
And whether it was those two old women in the kitchen, or a branch of leaves from a tree, eggs in a nest, a plum, firemen testing out a fire hose, he captured moments, fleeting bits of timeless history. His moment, his now, has become our now. What a rich heritage of what was going on throughout the world at that time. Small town America was a microcosm, not only of the United States, but the world at that time. He witnessed the beginning of airplanes. He witnessed the beginning of the automobile age. But he saw all of these things coming to fruition, and he recorded it for us. And that is a wonderful gift, the gift of his art.